Okefenokee Swamp. Some have called it the Terrible Swamp, the Monster. Native Americans called it the Trembling Earth. Covering 700 square miles of southeastern Georgia, the Okefenokee is a complex blend of cypress swamps, open freshwater marshes, and a vast pine flatwood area known as the Suwannee Forest. Since the times of early Americans, man has struggled with this creation of nature, quite often failing in the attempt. Some have tried to drain it of its water, torched its trees, ravaged its timberland, and then left it to rot. Only those special few with vision, determination, and the patience of the wise understood the inherent beauty of this land and the potential rewards that the Okefenokee held. And through this understanding has come a story of men establishing a long and fruitful relationship with this beautiful forest. A story that continues even today after 60 years. This is the story of Superior Pine.
Well, originally, to go with this area first, this country down here had been clear cut and cut out. It was the term for it. The original lumber companies, when they came into the South, and you're talking then from the mid-1800s up to the late 1800s, moved south, and they moved from Louisiana over this way, and they moved from up around Savannah down into this area. The large companies came in and they bought the land, bought the timber, they clear cut it, and they virtually left. And about this same time, Paper Makers Chemical was getting started up in Pennsylvania and Michigan. And it was a company that was essentially owned by three families, the Knight family, the Lawrence family, and the Williams family. And they were one of the largest suppliers of chemicals to the paper industry.
To understand Superior Pine products, you need to know of the three families whose joint ownership of a chemical company evolved into the ownership of Suwannee Forest, and of a fourth family that has managed the forest for most of the time since the 1930s. In 1900, a partnership was formed for the purpose of providing an improved sizing for paper manufacturers, a rosin size. The partners were brought together under the leadership of C.H. Knight. The partnership included Mr. Knight's father, John Knight, an English chemist, Mr. C.K. Williams and Joseph T. Williams, manufacturers of fillers and colors for the paper trade. Plant number 1 was built in Easton, Pennsylvania. In 1904, the firm reorganized with John Knight, its first president. In 1910, a second Easton plant was built with a young chemist placed in charge of manufacturing, William J. Lawrence. He was later designated to run and build a new mill in Kalamazoo, Michigan, subsidiary name of Western Papermakers Chemical Company. Lawrence ended up as president of the consolidated company and a one-third owner. Papermakers Chemical grew to include 3 rosin refining plants in the South: Pensacola, Jacksonville, and Savannah, as well as plants in Holyoke, Massachusetts, Albany, New York, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Portland, Oregon, Erith, England, and 5 other locations. In the mid-20s, the 3 principals, C.H. Knight, C.K. Williams, and William Lawrence, organized Superior Pine Products Company as a subsidiary of PMC and acquired Suwannee Forest as a raw material source for rosin. In 1931, Papermakers Chemical Company was sold to Hercules Powder Co, but Superior Pine Products was retained by the 3 families. At about this time, William Ottmeyer Sr. was employed first as a forester and later as president of the company. At his death, his son William Ottmeyer Jr. was named president and is providing a second generation of leadership. Since that time, the company has benefited from the descendants of the principals of PMC, who have served on the board of directors of Superior Pine Products: John G. Knight, John G. Knight Jr., and James R. Knight, Morris R. Williams, Ewart G. Davies, Joan Williams Rame, and Charles K. Williams, William J. Lawrence Jr., and John W. Lawrence.
The company has always had a support team of officers who operated from their own headquarters in Pennsylvania and Michigan. The first secretary-treasurer was C.K. Williams, who served until his death in 1944. His son, Morris R. Williams, who had assisted his father for many years, took over for the next 22 years. When I was elected to the office in 1967, I transported these old ledgers to Michigan, and of course we continued with the hand entry for many more years. Today, we are computerized both here and in Fargo. Board leadership of the company has come from its first two presidents, William J. Lawrence Sr. and John G. Knight, and since 1946 from our present board chairman, William J. Lawrence Jr.
Superior Pine Country is located in the coastal plains of extreme southern Georgia, known as the Flat Woods. This level, sandy tract of land covers 216,000 acres in Eccles and Clinch counties. The land, suitable for growing Superior slash and longleaf pines, is interspersed with swampy bays, ponds, and cypress domes. The ground cover is a diverse mixture of wiregrass, palmetto, gallberry, and wax myrtle. This diverse area turned out to be an excellent choice for Superior Pine products. In the 1920s, buying an extremely rural piece of property was much easier than actually taking control of it.
One of the first things they had to do was take possession of the property, just physically to take control of it, which wasn't an easy task. Then they had to stop the fires. For years, people burned the woods because you had to have green grass for your cows, and the cows were still here. It wasn't an easy matter to get rid of them and just stop people from burning. You know, it was a thing to do. You burned every year. Now this company came in that didn't want you to burn, and that didn't make sense to the people here. And a lot of them burned out of habit. A lot of them burned just for the pure meanness of it.
Fargo was rough. It was known for that. We had a killing every Saturday night. We would be at home in the house, and all once late at Saturday night, we'd hear pounding, and we'd say, somebody's killed. They're making his coffin. And I don't know that they ever told the police. I don't think they ever informed. It was just known that somebody was going to get killed.
In these rough days, burning the forest was a way of life for the local open-range cattle people. They felt that burning was the only way to get good grazing material for their herds. William Ottmeyer Sr. got their cooperation finally by not only continuing the policy of open-range grazing, but also by establishing a system of prescribed burning, which burns only the underbrush and leaves the pines to grow. It takes experienced foresters to control these fires and use them safely.
You have to have the right conditions, the right weather conditions, and the right wind, and it's a planned operation. You get a weather forecast, and you know which way your wind direction is, and you know the humidity and the condition of the fuel, whether it's wet or dry, and you need a cold front that comes in, and naturally the colder it is, the less harm it does to the trees. And it gives you a good, it's good for game management. It gives you a good deer browse and food for the animals. And like I say, it reduces the danger of fire.
Once a stand of pines matured enough to produce adequate resin, established crews were hired to tap the trees.
The way you get rosin wood, you have to have a mature tree first, which was a little bit of a problem when they got started. The only trees they had that were mature, for the most part, were in some of the ponds and all. But you go into the mature tree and you cut a strip across it, and the tree bleeds. And then you let it bleed for a while into a cup, and you cut a strip higher, and it bleeds again, and you collect this resin that comes out of the tree. And you take the resin to a distillery. And we had stills all over the property back then. I think at one time we had 5 stills operating on the property. You put the raw gum or the resin into a vat and you heat it. And when you distill it, the part that comes off the top in vapor is condensed and makes turpentine. The part of the residue that's left is rosin. Then the rosin would be graded. And one thing that was always interesting about Suwannee Forest when they started making the rosin here, the rosin was of a higher grade than papermaker chemical needed So they always sold their rosin, and they were right back to having to buy rosin again. Eventually, turpentine got to be a more valuable product because people were using turpentine in the paint business but it was always a byproduct. It wasn't something that they stopped one day making rosin and started making turpentine. The two go hand in hand. A lot of the family names here in Fargo now are CCC boys that came in and stayed. When the Civil Conservation Corps started and they were hunting places for young men to work during the Depression, they decided that they could send a lot of them to the South, and they began to come into a community like Fargo, and they set up camps and they did road work. They built roads.
I remember very well the 20s coming along, and we didn't have much fire protection, and really no equipment to do it with, so we didn't really get started in growing trees. But then in the 30s, after Roosevelt who was president at that time, put in the CCC camps, it made a difference, and they did a lot of good work, and that helped some of the trails that we call fire breaks that we used to traveled around, and they would have a ditch, and that would get rid of some of the water. Most of the time in this area was low, and it was wet, and it was very difficult to get through.
Of all the events in the history of Superior Pine, the Great Fires are what really stand out in people's memories. In a letter dated May 15, 1932, Bill Ottmeyer Sr. wrote, "I've had just 15 hours of sleep in the last 5 days and have been in a perfect hell all week. Conditions in the Suwannee Forest are getting worse each day. The wind has reached gale velocity and everything is powder dry. The speed the fire travels through our woods is horrible beyond words, and no one could ever convince me that it would be practical or even reasonable to have such a large tract of land burned. This fire was the biggest we have ever had, throwing fire a half a mile ahead of it, and the roar was like 1,000 freight trains. At one time, we very nearly had a whole crew of men burned. On top of all this, my pickup got burned up, and I almost with it."
And of course, in the fire of 32, that's about the time we first began to get a tractor or two into this country to help fight fire. It was a different concept of fighting fire. It was a different type fire because of the different even type stands of timber then than there were now. One of the biggest tools they had then when they had a fire, they would go to the woods, and first man there would take an axe and he'd chop down a young pine tree, and he'd take the top and actually go in and try to beat the fire down with it. And the only thing they could do back then was go to the nearest road and start another fire and try to burn from that road back towards the fire and put it out. And when you got a fire, you automatically started thinking of cutting your losses to maybe 1,000 acres or 5,000 acres, where now with the modern methods, we try to cut a fire to less than an acre when we find one.
Before advanced communication systems, the big problem with wildfires was how to notify people so they could get there to fight them. William Ottmeyer Sr. knew there was a better way to get people to fires faster. He had learned in the Signal Corps of the Marines what a life-saving tool radio could be.
He began to approach the FCC for a license to use radio as in fire control and in forestry, and they were opposed to it to start with. They felt like that the private segment had no business with radios, but he kept on until finally he got the first license. Back then, you built your own radio equipment. You didn't go to the store and buy a Japanese radio and stick it in your vehicle. You built your own, and Dad built most of the early ones, and the technology wasn't the same as it is now. I know the old ones used wire antennas, and Dad would build what he called a chicken coop. And it would be a big square box that fit on top of the pickup, and it was wire just wrapped round and round that.
Although we were in the turpentine business and working with Superior Pine Products Company, we had the shortwave radios, and we knew to gather our turpentine people up and go to the fire when we had one.
Fire towers have been a significant feature on the Superior Pine landscape almost since the beginning.
You get a reading, you pick up a smoke and you get a reading. Like it's 80, you go from here to your mouth and you get an 80 reading here. And then another tower, you get a reading from them. And where their reading is and your reading is crosses out. And that'll be where the fire is.
Another extremely momentous improvement in firefighting was born in Superior Pine Country, the fire plow. William Ottmeyer Sr. met with a machinist named Charles Mathis to devise a machine to furrow deep, wide trenches through the forest that would be difficult for fire to cross. The Mathis fire plow is still an important firefighting tool today. The original Mathis fire plow, sold to Superior Pine, stands today in the Smithsonian Institute. Of all the fires that have occurred in the history of Superior Pine, the one that really stands out is the fire of 1955.
I've said it a number of times when people say they fought the fire in 1955, I accuse them of lying, because that fire was gone. It had reached the stage it was generating its own air currents. Again, it was in one continuous stand the same size. There was no clear cuts that you could get to and start to fight it. The winds were 50, 60 miles an hour. The fire would run up a tree, it'd break the top out, it'd throw the top sometimes a quarter of a mile in advance of the fire, and when it would hit the ground, it was so dry and so hot that the ground would just explode around it.
I said, look over here. It had jumped that pond and was coming to us, right? I mean, the wind bringing it to us. I just taken the tracks and made about 3 circles out there, just as big as I could make it, and poured it good around the edge of it, and let it burn out. And I was going to stay in there till the fire went by me. I was scared I'd get caught out there with the tractor, you know, and I didn't want to burn up the tractor. And when it got up there, it got so hot I had to come out of it. So I jumped on the tractor and snatched it wide open, picked up my plow, and I went out of there. When I got to the road out there, the fire was still coming. And I pulled it over on the other side of the road and parked it. And there was a surge pipe there, so I just got off of the tractor and went and backed up on the end of that surge pipe till the fire went over. I seen deer and cows come out of there burning. I happened to be at headlight when it broke out. And it started on the west side of Superior Pine, up above headlight. And we got the headlight, it sounded like a jet airplane. When it got in that thing, and we followed it 4 days, crossed 441 and went in Suwannee River with it. Burnt 70,000 acres. And that's when they started planting trees.
All I can remember is mainly the smoke. The smoke was terrible, and the attitude of the people was the fire was going to burn up Fargo, the fire was going to burn up another little settlement down the road. Traffic was blocked on all the roads, and there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of confusion. And for 2 or 3 days, it was a time when it was an uncertain time.
We got better equipment to fight fires with now. Airplanes, water tanks. But I don't see it stopping a fire like that was.
In 1948, Superior Pine had the opportunity to change from a turpentine-producing forest to a paper pulp operation.
In the early 40s, the paper industry began to move south. Dr. Hurdy began to do a lot of research and found that you could make paper out of pine. And that really opened the doors in the South for the timber industry. Some of the other paper companies began to get interested in moving south and began to look at this area, and we were approached. Superior Pine was approached by St. Regis Paper Company. They were interested in building a mill somewhere in either South Georgia or North Florida. They hadn't settled on a site at the time. But they needed to secure one large tract of land that could be used as the backbone of a wood supply for that mill.
In 47, we were asked to come up and to go up to Fargo and to make a cursory examination of their lands up there to see whether or not St. Regis would be interested in going into a long-time lease. And a crew of us went up there, and we spent, I'd say, a couple of weeks. We ran parallel lines throughout the property, taking samples every 1/8 of a mile. And it was a well-timbered operation. Now, in fact, there were 65 crops of turpentine being worked on it at that time.
They talked about buying the land, which we weren't interested in selling, so they came up with this concept that they would buy a minimum amount of wood. They would pay us for a minimum amount of wood every year. They would have complete timber rights to the property. They could use it or dispose of it as they saw fit. They would pay us for 150,000 cords of wood a year. At the time, they felt like, and we felt like, that under proper forest management, this 200,000 acre tract of land would produce 150,000 cords of pulpwood a year on a sustained basis. But anyway, in 1947, we entered into that contract, and I believe it took effect on the first day of January 1948 for 60 years. This lease set the tone for the timber purchase agreement that went worldwide after that. Almost every timber purchase agreement that other companies have is a copy of the Superior Pine lease. St. Regis took over the town. We owned the little town, you know, almost virtually all the buildings here. St. Regis took over them and began operations. They took the employees. And the biggest thing it did, then they could start building a paper mill, which they did. And then we had a market for the timber here, and it was sort of boom days again for Fargo, because an awful lot of wood was being moved out of here. And I guess you could say the good times had come. St. Regis moved a sawmill in here and opened up a sawmill in Fargo, and Fargo began to grow, and we had our own drugstore here. We weren't as isolated as we'd been. We had a movie and drugstore, and our school was healthy, and there was a lot of people moving here, and everything was going well. And we went through the good times till 1955.
Mechanized logging was born in 1951 on Suwannee Forest. And from that day to this, we have progressed up. We used to use 8 men to a crew, and now we only have 4 men to the crew.
We call it mechanized logging. You know, the logging industry and the pulpwood industry, you automatically think about a chainsaw, back-breaking work by hand to cut these trees and put them on the ground. We call this mechanized logging, where we've got hydraulic machinery to give a man a good job, give a man safety while he's working, get him out of that hard, strenuous type labor, and put him in a chair where he's pulling levers and working just like somebody in a factory.
Mr. Marcus Rolls give me my start, really started in the pulpwood and logging business. They built a chip mill in 1951 in Fargo, the first in the United States. And Mr. Rolls asked me if I could log 2,000 cords a week. And I told him, yeah.
I consider our relationship with Superior Pine very good. I've been blessed. The Lord has let me be in Fargo and be the third of a generation of the Griffiths family that's had the opportunity to work on Suwannee Forest and make a living for myself and a lot of other people. I think there's always going to be improvements. There's always going to be better ways to do things. There's going to be new techniques to apply to grow timber faster. I think there's going to be new techniques in the wood harvesting industry. There's going to be ways to produce more at less cost, you know. So I think things are going to continue to grow and do better.
Saying that the lease ends in 2007 sounds like light years away to some people. It's more than a lifetime to most of us away. 2007 in forestry is a very short time when you consider that our trees are on a 25-year rotation. So for roughly the last 8 years, the trees that have been planted on this forest are our trees. They will be here when the lease is up. They'll be mature trees when the lease is up. So we're very interested in what's going on now because we're protecting our first crops when we take over the property. The original contract called that required that they pay us for a minimum of 150,000 cords of wood a year. Contract said that if the average annual growth ever increased above that, they would pay at a greater rate. There was never any consensus of what average annual growth was, and in forestry there really isn't. Back about this period, 1978 I believe it was, St. Regis submitted a growth study to Superior Pine that showed that they measured growth over a 5-year increment. I felt like their figures were incorrect. When they had made their computations, changing it, they had forgotten it. They had worked on it a year and had left out 1 year's growth. And they had to add that back in, and when they did, it showed the average annual growth for the 5-year period is 165,000 cords a year, which meant that they owed us then.
Even though the new figures benefited Superior Pine, neither side trusted the figures, and both sides hired consultants to set up a growth study with 300 permanent growth plots throughout the forest. After 3 years of study, the report showed that the average annual growth for those 3 years was not 165,000, but 241,000 cords per year. From then on, the growth studies continued, with the results being tabulated every 5 years. In the early 1980s, St. Regis, along with many other paper companies, fell on hard times. St. Regis was forced to sell one mill after another to try to stay in business.
St. Regis, back in the early 80s, became involved in several takeover attempts. The reason for these attempts was that the value of the Champion stock, of the St. Regis stock, was viewed to be much less than the value of the assets that the company owned. As a last resort, our chairman, Bill Hazelton, went to Andy Ziegler, who was the chairman of Champion at the time, and made a deal for a friendly takeover.
Then, in 1987, Champion Paper had a problem. There were simply no 25-year-old trees left to cut. They negotiated with Superior Pine to cut 23 and 24-year-old trees just to have an income. This meant income for Champion, more money for Superior Pine, plus Superior Pine will inherit more mature, valuable trees when the contract ends in 2007.
The forest, the harvesting, the way we go about it is Champion maps all that out, the acres and we just sort of stay on Champion and work with Champion to make sure that what they cut, that they site prepare back. That way, to ensure that we have a good stand of timber.
We are replanting a lot more than we are cutting. Over the years, I guess you'd say in 1947, when this contract was begun, that I don't think you had nearly the stocking in trees that you have now. I don't think you had nearly the wildlife that you have now, but proper forest management is conservation.
I think when the contract expires, unless Champion has some major manufacturing facility in the area, that Champion would probably, in my personal opinion, would not seek to renew the contract. I think the remaining part of the contract with Superior Pine and how we manage is really dependent on what happens to the performance of Champion. If Champion does well and the economy allows us to do well, I think that there would be a possibility of Champion doing something as far as a manufacturing facility within the Fargo area. But it's going to take some good times to do that.
Superior Pine has always had a commitment to Fargo. Though it only has 250 people now, it boasts numerous churches, a senior citizens center, a golf course, and many other amenities unusual for such a tiny town, including a fine grade school. The people of Fargo have had to fight hard to keep their school open, but the state of Georgia still wants to close the school and bus these children up to 1 hour away. Superior Pine has made a policy to donate land, time, and money to keep this wonderful and unique community alive.
We're looking forward to now a christening that'll come about next month in our church. Our girls both were christened here and married here, and then they want their babies christened here in the same church, and they have a lot of strong family ties here. And that's rewarding to me, and also the fact that our son-in-laws feel that way. They were not raised here, but they feel that strongly about this little community and about Fargo.
Superior Pine Products Company and Fargo have been a part of my life since I was a small boy. My first trip to Fargo was at the age of 10. I went with my father and mother on the train, and we arrived in Fargo, which was a flag stop, at 5 a.m. I have been involved with Superior Pine either directly and or indirectly ever since. I love the trees, I love the animals, the bear, the deer, the alligators, and the birds who have all thrived in their natural habitat. The forest has been managed by professional foresters who have lived and loved the environment. There are more trees and more wood in Suwannee Forest today than there was 75 years ago. Our forest is a model for the industry, and our goal for the future is to make sure Champion continues to manage the forest properly until the end of the contract, so we will be able to choose what direction we will take. We are well along that path, and the future looks bright. We may take over the management of the forest, sign another long-term lease. Who knows about the future in our changing world? We have seen one revolution from naval stores to fiber for paper. Whatever the need for southern pine in the 21st century, Superior Pine will be ready.
The contract with the paper company that started in 1948. It was a 60-year contract, which was going to end in 2008. And when we got into the early 90s, we could see that it was coming up quicker than anything else that we'd ever experienced in that 50-plus year experience we'd had. We wanted to plan for it, and that's when we started getting ourselves together and with facilitators and experts of many different types, and starting to do strategic planning. We were looking at a lot of far out things that we knew we would never put into play. There was the idea of a large commercial airport. But there were a couple of things that did seem to have some application to us in Fargo, and one of those was a retirement village, a spot for people to come in their retirement years. And then we thought too in terms of a spot for folks to come to for visiting the Okefenokee State Park.
We felt like we had about 5 years left and it was time to begin to prepare. We look at other opportunities. We want to diversify. We don't want to be tied to one product. We signed a letter of agreement to end the contract. Well, that put us in a panic stage then because we did have to be prepared to take over. And everything was in place though, and all we had to do was beef up. On January 1, when it became official, we were ready. It was just another normal day for Superior Pine, and I don't think there is a better compliment to the people we picked than that.
We've been sitting at the starting gate for 2 years, I have. January 1 was the best day out of those 2 years. We got to pull the trigger, and we have got some work done. Everything is on track. Our planting will start tomorrow, our tree planting will start tomorrow. Every road on this 42,000 acre parcel has been graded in less than 1 week.
I got out of high school in '61, went to work with my daddy in the woods, and I've been working on this forest ever since. Not gonna be any change on the land, the harvest techniques and all that, and all the environmental things that we've had to cope with over the years. We still got to make sure all that's done. But the logging job itself, I'll be dealing with people that I got a lot of confidence in. I think things is going to settle down at Fargo and be a lot more stable and a lot better working situation.
This is one of our logging operations, and to me as a forester and a business manager, this is the most important stage in the life of this tree. So 28 years ago, somebody came out here and planted these trees. They planted the trees, protected them from insects and disease, paid taxes on this land, protected it from fire, and this is the most important process to me because this is our paycheck, this is our payday. We have foresters out here that watch the contract compliance and the separation on it, so we can be assured that we're receiving the highest dollar value for all our timber. But we're prepared to change the management regime in this forest from a 25-year rotation, which this forest has been managed on for the past 56 years. We'll move towards an older rotation that will be determined by financial models that tell us when to cut the timber. We're moving to provide different kind of products like chip and saw material, pine saw timber, and poles. Every one of our employees is going to treat this forest as if they own it themselves, and they have ownership in it. And it will be better because of that.
This time, when we had the forest flown, we were given a CD, and it was all digitized. And now we can take and make maps. We can begin to delineate the stands. And then we had to locate the roads. We used GPS, where we go out and actually measured those roads, located them, located all the bridges, the culverts that we had to maintain, and then the individual stands.
We use two programs, T-Cruise and Solo Field. And the Solo Field is our mapping software, and it works in conjunction with our cruise program called T-Cruise, which is a volume workup whenever we cruise timber to see how much timber we're dealing with.
We'll have to determine first what species is there, what the age of it is, what the site index is.
Right now I'm following my navigation, and it's telling me that I'm getting real close to apply. So it's going to be beeps at me. I put my cruising stick down, and I'm ready to take a point. All our acreages are GPSed. We use computer-generated grids with the GPS, and we're more efficient, more accurate in the woods.
We have formed Superior Blueberries, and we're going into the blueberry production. Presently, we have 100 acres planted. This week, we will plant 200 more acres, and next year, we'll plant another 200 acres. We're committed to plant 500 acres of blueberries.
I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill, on Blueberry Hill. When I found you,
blueberries are native to this area, and we have the perfect soil for growing them. We planted 100 acres last year, along with putting in the second largest nursery, blueberry nursery in Georgia. And we're currently on phase 2, planting 200 acres. We've signed a contract with Suwannee Ridge Farms that recently put a packaging plant in Homerville. There's several innovative things that we're putting in on the farm. This is the latest technology in irrigation, which is going to allow us to fertigate and save money by using the fertigation, which is a method of delivering the fertilizer. The farm is laid out into zones, and these zones are working zones that will be irrigated separately and work separately. We've laid them out with our new GIS system, along with the roads and the irrigation system. Everything's marked on the GIS system. We're currently planting 3 cultivars, Brightwell, Powder Blue, and Premier. And the reason we're planting 3 is for cross-pollination. They're not very self-fertile. So you plant them in that pattern across the field. The first year we'll pick by hand, and we'll always have a level of hand picking, trying to get leader berries off. But the second year we'll pick by machine harvest. When we have 500 acres in production at maturity, we should harvest a little over 7 million pounds of fruit.
We've been approached a number of times by Suwannee Ridge. They would like to see Superior Pine go to 2,000 acres, which if we do that, we'd probably be the largest blueberry producer in the nation. We're blessed with acreage. We're blessed with very good acreage, and we may do it. I think 2,000 acres is well within the realm. I have to tell you an interesting story. There's a professor, and when he finds out there's a new farm in, it's his thing to go to them and just tear them out of the frame. Everybody wants him to come, because when he comes, he points out the errors, and you can correct them, but he's really not nice in the way he does it. And he found out about Superior Berries and how big the farm was, so he called and asked to come. And I missed it that day. I'm sorry I wasn't here, but he came here, and Matt was a little apprehensive. And Dr. Maitland drove up, and he started looking, and he got in, and he rode with Matt for a little piece. Didn't have much to say, and then finally he said, take me back to my car. And I think Matt said, oh, heck. And he got back, he said, I want to get my camera out. He said, this is the way it's supposed to be. And he said, I want to take pictures. And that was his entire comment on Superior Berries. And so I guess he uses Superior Berries in his lecture now. It's become the model for the industry already. Some of the things we've looked at are the pine straw market. Pine straw is terribly important in the South and Midwest as an ornamental decoration or an ornamental tool for landscape art people. And there's a demand for pine straw.
We decided to make an attempt at pine straw production on at least part of our forest. And you see what we have right here is a very difficult task. There is pine straw there, it's just unobtainable because of the vegetation that's growing there. If you look right across the road, you see in the next 2 months we'll have about 60 people in here raking pine straw in the stands that we've already worked on. Another thing I'd like to point out is that you see some grasses that are growing right here, which is actually better forage for the game animals than the woody stems that we've eliminated here. We're very sensitive about our wildlife here at Superior Pine, and we have left game corridors that transect these pine straw areas and tie into ponds where the game can have a place to not only hide but to nest and sleep. Whatever product comes out of this forest has to be produced, grown, harvested, and delivered to our customers in an environmentally responsible way. And it's the right thing to do for Superior Pine and for our customers.
There's hardly anything like this in the South. The life that exists in this really pristine area that is in our nearly 220,000 acres is unique and probably not found hardly anywhere. A 50-mile radius around Fargo, you would run into less than 200,000 people. And when you think of a circle that is a 50-mile radius with that small a population, it's probably the smallest that exists anywhere in the East Coast. Superior Realty is a subsidiary of Superior Pine. It was formed for the purpose of specializing in real estate opportunities that we had in our over 215,000 acres. We saw that as something that we needed to concentrate a special effort on and be knowledgeable about as those opportunities came along.
Fargo has 380 souls here now. And we really need to slowly develop Fargo. After the hurricanes in Florida last year, a lot of people decided they didn't want to be quite that far south. We're getting a lot of calls of people that want to live in a rural setting.
The expansion of the state park and the welcome center and the conference center will bring employees into the community that will need home sites. This expansion of the highway coming north-south 441 is a major effort being taken by the state of Georgia. The highway will come straight through Fargo and will be divided by a barrier that will make it a landscape boulevard effect, and it's one that will make Fargo become much more noticeable to the traveling public. As we bring visitors into that area, we think they will be attracted to the living accommodations that can be provided in the Fargo area.
We're looking at an RV park, which will probably be one of the first things we have, that will work in conjunction with the Suwannee River Park here. We're also looking at forming some 5- and 10-acre ranchettes, and we're going to try to capitalize on that market also.
We've also been very supportive of the community of Fargo and helping out with all the community causes. I think we've been good citizens. I think we always will be.
Superior Pine pioneered plantation forestry. All the people that they've had working with them through time, particularly I guess that Bill's dad, Mr. Ottmeyer Sr., really kind of set the standard for what was expected. That you would be a gentleman, your word would be your bond. You work hard, but your rewards would be good. And along the way, you take care of the community that supports you, and you take care of the forest and the people that work with you. And I think that that's a reputation that a lot of people have written a lot of management books about giving advice to these corporate 100 companies, but they were doing it as a matter of common sense 80 years ago, and they haven't stopped. And I think that's one of the things that has been an absolute key to their, I guess, by anybody's measure, unqualified success through the years.
We needed to continue to develop our leadership team. We're at a period over the next few years where we're going to have some transitions at the board level and at the senior management level, and we need to assure that we have the kind of dedication and talent in the future that we've had in the past. That's critical. And we need to remember the people that have come before us who have just been such wonderful stewards of this company and the property, and always keep that in mind, that it's a resource for us. In part it's a resource for people to come, and in part it's a resource for the public, for example with the hunting clubs who use our property. And we have a tradition of being great stewards of the resources, and we need to make sure we continue to do that for the future.